All right, guys, so I had a long morning of tuning. Finally got some decent weather out there today, and I spent a good probably hour idling and working on the timing and fuel and ignition advance or injector advance, and I made some pretty good progress. I figured out by basically looking at the idle speed and figured out my best timing that I could, you know, without having a dyno or something like that. Turned out it was around 31, 32 at 1,000 RPM. So I backed it off about 28, and then I put a plus and minus 3 ignition advance retard function in there to kind of keep it stable. It looks like the air fuel ratio wants to be about 12.5. Anything less than that, and it starts getting into the injector point where they're not really that accurate, so it's wanting to wander around. So I'll settle with a little bit rich of an idle if it's nice and consistent. Messed with some of the injector advance, and I kind of took a hint from the documentation and set it to about 40. I can show you here in a minute. Let me bring back, well, this is it. At any rate, I did a good bit of tuning, and is this the one I want? Yeah. Let me see. This is the map. It's got a lot of anything in red or white is a change, and so there's very few values left over there from before. If we want to look at the graphical representation, and this still needs some fleshing out, this is pretty much what we're left with. The idle range being down here, boost range being up here. Most of this is very linear because about 5 pounds of boost is right in this area here. Actually, that's 3.3, so the 5 and 6 pounds is right in this area. Anything above that, and I'm purposely staying away from based on the boost controller settings. So we're going to take a look at the log from the latest drive in a minute, and then we'll come back and refine some of these items. But essentially, I worked this out. Let's see, for the injector advance, what I wound up with was basically a graph that looks like this. So essentially, it's basically pretty linear with RPM and not load. Load is pretty well fixed. So it's starting out at about 45, and then it goes up to about, oh, I don't know, around 90 at the high end. It's very, very difficult to tell any changes in the RPM at idle. But what I did notice is that around 40, I could get an extra 100 RPM out of it. Anything earlier than that at idle, and it didn't seem to do anything. And it was ridiculously high earlier. I don't know how those numbers came about. Like I said, this is subject of another another discussion, a video, because the documentation is, I won't say it's contradictory, but it's a little bit contradictory. So yeah, there I went ahead and said it anyways. It's a little bit contradictory. I know what I want. It's just a matter of trying to get the figure out how to format that for the particular AEM. So what I'm going to do is launch the logging program here and open up the log of my latest drive. I took 2 drives. The first drive, the log, well, the computer crashed at that point. It wasn't the computer's fault. It's just something that Series 1, it was on all day doing a bunch of different things, and it just got tired and cranky and decided not to keep my log. But let's see, that was the last one I did. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And what I'm going to be really looking for here, the car was driving pretty well, idled pretty well, didn't have any problems at the stoplights and stop signs. Air fuel was following the map. Let me just show you one more time before I get into that, what the target fuel map is looking like now. So that is one thing that I also did, is that I changed around the air fuel ratio target map. This is the idealized, I say idealized, map of values for the air fuel ratio for the different loads and RPMs. And so essentially I richened up all the idle areas to about 12.5, and then moving into 13, and then these cruise areas set at around 14.7 or stoichiometric, because that's just efficient that way for fuel consumption. And then essentially as soon as I get on the gas, it just bumps into the 11.5s, solid 11.5s in the boost area, from essentially positive boost on up. And so just a smooth transition from stoichiometric on through the boost areas, and it seems to be driving pretty well. Now the key is to try to get the main fuel map target pulse widths to mirror this pretty well. And the best way to do that is to log your O2 feedback while you're driving. So ideally, the main fuel map without any trims in it would be very close to giving me these air-fuel ratios in open loop. If I had no O2 feedback on, I should be seeing these values at these different ranges. And so what I'm going to be looking at in the log, and this is how I typically go through and make tweaks to it, is what I'll do is I've got, this is just my standard log of engine speed, engine load, and O2. All right, and I've got two O2s. And so the first thing I'm going to do is overlay my second oxygen sensor on the third graph there, so I can see how much they're off from one to the other. And I'm still not convinced that this doesn't have to do with the different. I still don't know whether this has to do with the different style of oxygen sensor or just the fact that one's old, one's new, or what. But actually, these are marrying up pretty good compared to what they were doing before. I'm going to take a look at it in, let's see. Here was a little burst right here. I'm going to zoom in on that little section and see what we got. So I'm going to take this and expand it to that size right there. And so we can see just a little bit of a getting on the gas right there. There's a pretty good discrepancy right there. Woohoo! Well, that's after I got off the gas. Let's look at it down here while I was on the gas. All right, so while I was on the gas, I'm looking at 12.0 and about 13.0. Now, that's almost a whole point, or 0.9 of a, the ratio off. That's something that bears looking at. So I may wind up doing, that bank still seems to be lean. This O2 sensor number 2 is on 5, 6, 7, and 8. Cylinders 5, 6, 7, and 8. O2 number 1 is on 1 through 4. And so being that those are off, what I really want to see now is what the feedback is doing. So in order to keep things decluttered, what I think I'll do is overlay that on the number 1, just so that I can get it to where I can see. There's so many different ways you could format this. I'm just used to doing it a particular way, and I want to try to do it such that you guys can see it. All right, so if I look at the O2 feedback, I can see that number 2, like in this range right here, is given 11%, adding 11% fuel, and number 1 is adding almost 6%. This is in the 3,000 range at an engine load of about -7. And so that's a cruising area. The actual air-fuel ratio is right where it's supposed to be, right around 14.7. So this is the actual output, and it's doing well. But this is what's having to be done in order to get to that point. So I'm going to go back, like for instance, now that I know that the engine is lean at 3,000 RPM at the -7 load point, what I can do is go back to my calibration, bring up the fuel map, and find that cell. So that cell would be, -7. That's, of course, it's right in between two cells. Let me come down here. So -7 at 3,000 is right there. So that's telling me that that cell is somewhere between 6 and 11% lean. All right. So what I can do, just as a quickie fix, is come in here, right click on this cell, and then I'll say a percent change. And so the way AEM works with percent changes is that you put in what you want done. So if that was, I don't know, we'll call it anywhere from 6 to 11. So we'll split the difference and say it was 8% lean. If I want it to be 8% richer right there, I would put in 108 and then hit enter. And that brings that up to 2.63. All right, so if I now know that that is reasonable for that range, I can probably see already that some of these other ones are going to be a little on the lean side. And if I go to my graph, just to show a graphical representation, that point at 3,000 at -6, that was the point I just adjusted there. And you can see how it's got just a little bit of a hump. And that means that these other areas probably on down the range are going to be lean. because it usually just gets worse as RPM goes up if it's lean. And then right below that, I'll have to go back to my log and see. But while I'm here, if this one was at 2.63 for the pulse width, I can just bump these up right there. I'll go to 2.72 out the rest of the range, and then I probably will be all right in there. Anything less on the load range down towards the bottom is probably going to be under deceleration, so there's no reason to richen up those areas. All right, so I'm just going to stick with that for now, but that's the methodology that I go about trying to fix excessive oxygen sensor feedback. What I'd really like to have is the oxygen sensors with feedback are always pulling fuel. They should never be adding fuel. So at a first glance, what I wind up doing is running through, let me zoom out on this. What I would do is go through, and this is the entire drive. It's about a 9-10 minute drive. And yeah, those O2 feedbacks are essentially all over the map. All right, so what I'd like to do is get that main fuel map down to the point where all these feedback values are within about 5% of the thing, and I'd prefer it if they're on the negative side. So in other words, they're pulling anywhere from 0 to 5% fuel the whole time the engine's running, in order to keep it next to that or near that O2 target map. So essentially I'd sit there, and I've got a little cheat sheet that I made. Let me just show you that real quick, because that's something that I found that was handy. This may take a second to load. This computer's not all that fast. Essentially what I did was I made a little spreadsheet that looks very similar to a fuel map. And what I can do is put in the values on that thing right from the log. Now, a long time ago, I actually made a program that would do this, an actual basic program that would do this, a Visual Basic program, and show me stuff. But that's a topic for another day. But essentially, I just made myself a little spreadsheet here. And this does not have any actual function other than just to act as a scratch pad for me. So what I'll do is I'll just go in here, and this marries up with my fuel map, and it's nothing but just a blank spreadsheet. And I would put in here all the values that I get just by hand, the values that I get out of the log as far as plus, minus. I might just put an L or a rich or something like that, lean or rich. And then after I work through the entire log, then and only then would I go back to the actual calibration and get a feel for what areas of the map are lean and what areas of the map are rich. And then I can make some intelligent corrections to it. So do modern systems do this for you? Sure they do. In fact, this one even does it. It's got a function in there to learn. However, the thing about the auto learning, and this is something that maybe some people appreciate and other people don't, there's an inbuilt lag in the oxygen sensors, and I can show that on a log by looking at it. And the best way to do that, I'm going to come out of this and take off my overlays for feedback values. I'll leave the second oxygen sensor in there, and then I'm going to go to the number 3 and put in throttle. All right. Matter of fact, I think what I'll do, now that it's in there, this won't be easy to see with just that, so I'll tell you what, let me just go to the graph setup. We're just going to have one plot, and we're going to have, on that overlay, we'll just add throttle. I don't want this to be too cluttered, so I'll just add throttle, engine load. I'm going somewhere with this, guys, so just bear with me. Engine load, and the new oxygen sensor is really fast. It's probably much faster than the old one. So I'm going to put in O2 number 2. That would be the new one, the LSU 4.9. All right, so I'll have 4 items on this one graph, and it looks horrible right now, and that's normal for looking at a graph like this, because we've got 4 different channels shown at once, and they're all scrunched together. So the first thing I'll do is run this, is expand this out a little bit. There was a pretty good run there. There's a zoom function right there. All right, let's make it a little bit bigger. So what I'm really trying to look at here is the delay between the time that I stab the throttle and the map sensor recognizes that as a change in pressure in the intake manifold, and then when the oxygen sensor actually reports that to the ECU. So let us say right here, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit further, right here and right there. That's a gear change right there. Okay, so the throttle is in green. All right, so that's right there. The engine load is almost immediate. There's very little difference between the time that the engine load and the engine, the throttle and the engine load basically mirror each other pretty well. Not much lag there. This is a bad example. Let me see if I can find another one. How about when I get off the gas right there? So if I get off the throttle right there and check the time, that's 13.54. The oxygen really doesn't respond till about 13.68, which is about a little over 1/10 of a second. That's actually pretty good. I bet you if I overlay the first oxygen sensor, you'll see that it has a little bit more lag than that. Let's see. We'll put that on there too. Yeah. All right, so for this one right here, this little dip in the oxygen sensor reading is about when it winds up going lean. Let me jump out and see if I can find a better one. This one is a little hard to read right there. I want one where I've got a rapid throttle opening. There, I stabbed it right there. Let me zoom in here. Right there. And then, well, shit. I'll get 2 there. Anyway, it's busy. I wasn't going full throttle, so it's a little tough to tell there. But you can see that this is the point where I hit the throttle. And you really don't see the extra fuel coming in. There's a pretty significant lag there because it doesn't go rich or start to come down rich until about right there. And so what that means is that it's not instantaneous. They're not perfect. That's I'm looking at time here. That's 11.38, and then that's 11.6. So we're talking about 0.2 of a second for that good oxygen sensor, and almost 0.4 of a second, 11.7 for the older oxygen sensor. So that is basically your sensor delay and the difference between a good oxygen sensor and one that's maybe a little bit laggier. All right, so the reason why I point this out is because when you're doing auto mapping, which is what AEM calls it in their older style systems, or any type of calibration where you've got the computer auto learning or auto, trying to match these up, is that when you're under transient conditions and you stab the throttle, your throttle position and your oxygen sensor readings don't necessarily match up perfectly. And so what you'll wind up doing is having it make corrections to cells that are not the cell that it needed work on. I don't know if that makes any sense, but with 0.2 to 0.3 or 0.4 delay in the oxygen sensor readings, you're going to wind up having the auto learning function changing cells for the wrong load and RPM positions. And so by doing it by hand, what I can do is make sure that and this goes for oxygen sensor feedback as well, so there's always a little bit of delay there. And so if you match them up manually by using, hand jamming it like this and just putting in where the individual cells were rich, then you can get the fuel map in a lot better shape a lot quicker. So that's part of the deal. Okay, back to where we were talking about a minute ago. Had to play with the dog for a little bit. So at any rate, I was kind of rambling a little bit there, but my main point was that auto learning doesn't always give you the best possible fuel map. And what I want to wind up doing is going through here, especially since I got these new injectors, and there's a little bit of difference in what the target air fuel ratio should be. Just purely rescaling the map didn't really work as well as I'd hoped it would, and it's always going to be just kind of a generic thing to do that with. So what I'm going to wind up doing here for the next little while, and there's no point in you guys watching that, is I'm going to go through this log, not this particular one, that was the way I had it before. I'm going to go through this log and look at, I don't need that, I don't need that. And find out where my map, at least for the regions that I've visited while I was out there driving, and I like to try to mix it up a little bit so I can see the different areas. I'm going to go through and look at this whole map and find out where the feedback was the highest and lowest, and fill out that little form that I had, and I guess I'll show that to you when I get done going through it, and then I'll transpose those values to the main fuel map. One thing that what you can do is that although using the functions, the built-in functions for the fuel map, it saves you from having to sit there and guess and bump them up and bump them down. If you know it's 10% lean, you can actually just tell it be 10% richer in that particular cell. If you're wanting to make the calculation yourself, it's not that hard. There's a formula for it. I'll show you at some point too, but I usually just use the one that's built in because it does as well as it does it as well as I can. The main thing is that since I'm only going to be visiting a sampling of these different things, depending on how you drive, you're never going to see every cell on this without a dyno, and even then you're not going to see every cell. The idea is to get an idea of where you drive, where those values for the main map need to be, and then use the graph to smooth them out a little bit so that you don't have these peaks and valleys that don't make sense, and the sharp transitions from one load cell to the next, because it does do a lot of averaging, and you have to be kind of smart about how you pull these values up and how you push them down in order to get smooth transitions from one RPM range to the next, because there's an awful lot of interpolation that's going on in the as the engine's running. So that's just kind of one of my methods of work. The car is running fairly well, and if you don't mind the O2 feedback doing a lot of work, then I guess you could probably leave it at that. But like I said in an earlier video, I prefer to have my calibration file such that I don't have to run closed loop. I could run open loop and it would still run very well. And in some cases it runs even better. That's tough to achieve, but it's not tough to get it close. It just takes a good bit of grunt work. And I enjoyed kind of doing this stuff. It's part of the fun of having a programmable EMS that you can monkey around with it. If all you want to do is drive your car and have fun with it and have it work right out of the box, then you know there are systems out there that will allow you to do that. But I enjoy getting under the hood and trying to get it running like a sewing machine over time, and so that's part of it. And I'm just showing you kind of some methods of work, road tuning, all right, and data logging. So there you go. Appreciate your time, and I'll get back to you with the results and show you another log and how it goes. All right, see you guys. So after going through the whole log, this is kind of what I came up with, and it's pretty easy to tell that on the low load ranges, it's rich, and when you start getting up into boost ranges, especially at high RPM, it's leaning out. And there is still a pretty good discrepancy between the left and the right banks, and I think I'll probably, now that I know it's not fuel pressure related, then I'll probably just go in there and trim them individually, or I'll get matching O2 sensors and see if they both agree then. That's an expensive option though, and I don't really want to go that way if I don't have to. So I'm going to go in here and make some adjustments to the main fuel map, and then next time I drive it, we'll see how well it went. So that's it for now.